Hey everybody, it's Kelly. Welcome back to another episode of Ask a Therapist. Today we're talking about loneliness in the LGBTQIA plus community. This is an issue that comes up all of the time in comments, in direct messages I get, in communication with people as a whole, specifically within the LGBTQIA plus community. Pre-lockdown, 21% of people in our community would have said they feel lonely very often or every day. During lockdown, that number increased to 56%. That is a much bigger increase than those who are not in the queer community were feeling. And for those under 18, that number is 67%. 67% of teens are either feeling lonely very often or every day. The reasons for this are multiple, and I'm going to give those reasons to you because I want to normalize this feeling of loneliness for you. It won't be forever, but it is very normal for you to feel lonely and or isolated at this time. The reason that so many people in the queer community feel so lonely so often is fourfold: social, emotional, and cognitive isolation, and the need to conceal your identity. Let's break that down a little bit. Number one, social isolation. This one happened to everyone during the pandemic, but specifically within the queer community, because you're not guaranteed to be in your home with someone who identifies the same way that you do. Often there's a lack of an emotional support system. If you have queer friends, you get this. There is something different about those friendships, about the friendships with people who understand what it's like to not be part of the heteronormative world, and that support that you get just from being with them. You don't even have to talk about how hard it is to be queer. You don't have to talk about the stressors that you have in your life because of your identity. You just know that you are all going through that and you can just be there for each other. There are things you don't have to explain to them that you would have to explain to your cishet friends. The last thing in this category that I want to bring to your attention is victimization. When you tell someone who you are and they choose to not accept it or to not embrace that fully, that can lead to victimization. It makes you feel alone. It makes you a target of anger and frustration, lack of understanding. All of those things withdraw your social supports and leave you isolated. Number two is isolation emotionally. When you have to guard the truth of who you are and you don't have a lot of safe people, you're isolated socially and you aren't sure who to trust, that guard is preservation, often safety-wise, definitely emotionally, but that also keeps you from allowing people to know you fully. And when people don't know you fully, when they're not able to reflect back to you who you are and how you put yourself out into the world, that can make you feel very, very lonely. Emotionally, if you don't have that mirror, you have a hard time developing your emotions on the level of your age, which leads then to a lot of people in our community being emotionally underdeveloped, which then leads to relationships that can be destructive because people go into it looking for emotional fulfillment from the other person instead of go into things like a partnership to learn more about yourself and about each other, and with a curiosity and an independence that relationships need in order to survive. Number three is another one of those heteronormative issues, which is the isolation that happens in your cognition, in your way of thinking. When you don't see yourself reflected back in TV shows, when you don't see yourself in media, except for people who are getting largely demonized because they don't fit the social norm, the understanding of who you are, the understanding of how relationships should evolve, the understanding of just information about how things like sex works or how things like dating works, the knowledge base that people in the cishet community have all of the time because that's the norm. When you're queer, you don't have that. So cognitively, your understanding of who you are and how that works and how that functions in society, and your knowledge base of what any of that means historically, traditionally, for you, for the future, none of that actually exists unless you have ways to seek it out. And there are a lot of people that don't have ways of seeking that out. Next one, concealing your identity. When you have to hide, when you have to conceal who you are, or sometimes when you don't know who you are until later in life and you don't know who's safe, the hiding of who you are leads to not being able to connect to people. Very similar to emotional isolation, also similar to social isolation, the concealing of your identity from yourself often leads to walls up around you. And we live in a world where it is not always safe to take down those walls. And when you don't know who's safe, you are likely to assume no one is safe because that is safer than assuming everyone is. Heteronormativity plays a big part in all of this because the world we live in is full of examples and understandings and assumptions about the way relationships work. Not every heterosexual relationship works the normal way either, but the amount of difference that there is in the queer community and relationships is vast. And the inability to see yourself in those around you and to relate to others is very isolating. So here we are. We have this isolation. We have this loneliness. What do we do with it? First of all, you do what you're doing right now. You seek out people who represent your community, who have a knowledge base in what's going on, and can help to normalize the things that you're feeling and the things that you're doing. Many of you have taken the time to make comments and respond to each other and to support each other on a lot of these videos on this channel. I think that's amazing. The traditional way of being together as people are not always options to us as queer people anyway. Specifically during the pandemic and in the change of social norms since then, the hectic pace of life in general, it makes it very difficult to have the energy and the time to put into seeking out those spaces where other queer people might be. And you have the issue of, are you gonna like anybody? How awkward is it to just go to a group of people and try to make friends? When you're involved in something like an online group or like commenting on a YouTube channel, you can see underneath a lot of that fronting that people will do and have authentic conversations. I often advocate people to find Facebook groups or meetup groups, anything that they can find that has people who will reflect back to them positivity about their identity and who will listen to their stories. We all want our stories heard. And unfortunately, when our stories look so different from what society has decided is the appropriate story, it's really hard to get them heard. So I want to encourage you to continue to utilize this space, utilize our community tab, and respond to people's comments on the videos. This can be a place where you come to find connection with others. And if you've heard nothing else that I've said in this entire video, if you skipped all the normalizing and the understanding of the fact that loneliness is intrinsically part of our experience right now, and we have to do a little more work to get out of that to be able to connect to others, hear this. You are valid, your experience is real, your emotions are real and valid, and you belong. That's it for today. Thank you so much for being here. See you all next week, and until then, take care of yourselves and each other.